welcome to the Clean Network Weekly Telecon. Today is November 14th, and we have the distinct honor of having a live presentation from two of the delegates from Minnesota, from the COP23 meeting. And I look very much forward to your presentation and your insights from this very important meeting for the network and beyond. Also remember that while the group may be small here today, there are many more people who watch the recording. So, please, we look forward to your insights. So before we do that, do we have any announcements for the network before we get going into the presentation? Nothing? One more chance? Anything? All right, looks like everybody just wants to get right to the presentation. So Kristen, I give you the stick.
Awesome. So can everyone see my slide?
I can.
Okay, because for me, like the chat box in front of it is in front of it, so I wanted to make sure everyone knows it. Well, thank you for letting us take over the Clean Network call today live from Bonn, Germany, although I'm live from Minneapolis, Minnesota, unfortunately. I wanted to just take an opportunity to make sure that everyone kind of had the context for today. I'm Kristen. I'm the Director of Programs at Climate Generation. And as you probably all have heard me say before, our mission is really to engage individuals in their communities in climate change solutions. And we do this through working with youth, working with educators, working with the public, and working with influentials, individuals like businesses and decision makers. And we have had the distinct honor of being an accredited organization that can be observers at United Nations climate change negotiations. And we've been doing that since COP15. And in that year, we actually sent a delegation of Midwest youth leaders to observe and engage in the negotiations. And since that time, we've sent some smaller groups of folks there, and the last big delegation we sent along was to Paris in 2015, when we sent a delegation of 10 teachers from across the country to act as learners and also communicators back to their classrooms and communities, and also to really elevate the important role that I think everyone here agrees with that education plays in ensuring that climate action not only continues, but that we know what to do next. So this year, for COP23, which is taking place in Bonn, Germany, we've sent a multi-sector delegation of 9 people from Minnesota to engage. And this is really based on the recognition that we believe it takes all sectors to address this issue, and all voices have to be represented at the decision-making table. So our delegates represent education, law, philanthropy, youth, elected officials, and indigenous communities. And we're there this year. We find it to be especially important to show that we are still in, even though there is inaction at the federal level. We have a very strong subnational presence, and I'm sure everyone will kind of get more into that. So COP23 is bringing together nations of the world to continue their work on strengthening this global response to climate change. And today we're excited to have 2 of those folks here to talk to you, and I'm just going to introduce them and then turn it over to them. One of them, the first, is John Olson. John Olson is the science content specialist for the Minnesota Department of Education. He works on science learning goals and instruction with teachers, schools, districts, and other state education leaders. He serves on the board of directors for the National Science Teachers Association as director for coordination and supervision of science education. His background includes teaching in several settings. He taught physics and environmental science. And in the early 70s and again in 2016, John served in Liberia with the US Peace Corps as a rural teacher trainer. He was a lead state representative for the development of the next generation science standards. And our other special guest today is Adri Arquin. Adri is an 8th grade student at St. Paul Academy in St. Paul, Minnesota. And going to COP23, he says, is an excellent opportunity for him to bring a new perspective to the conference. He's been interested in the issue of climate change and global cooperation for a long time. And at his school, he's found that many people care deeply about what they can do and what we as a generation need to do to help solve this massive issue. He's excited to go to COP23 and bring back the knowledge to share with many of his peers at St. Paul Academy. And he hopes that through this experience, he can learn more about these topics that are interesting to him and his peers. So with that, I'm gonna stop showing my screen and let you all see John and Adri in Bonn, Germany.
All right, well, Kristen was actually not quite right. We are not in Germany. That's just sort of a cover story to keep our supervisors happy. We're in Fiji, and it's just this lovely kind of place, and we're warm and balmy, and we just got off the beach. And this is kind of the meeting rooms that the conference is in, these nice tropical huts where we sit around and talk climate change and enjoying the warmer part of the climate. Well, that's actually not quite the story. And Adri's going to say a little bit about the setting where we're in and some of the organization of the space here.
So in COP23 here in Bonn, they've built 2 main zones throughout the conference, the Bula Zone and the Bonn Zone, alongside a separate building for the U.S. Climate Pavilion, which is around the Post Tower, one of the most famous landmarks in Bonn. This picture is of the Bula Zone. The Bula Zone is the smaller of the 2 areas. Here's where most of the deliberation and the agreeing will come from the delegates and the leaders of the nations and their departments themselves. Unlike in Paris, a lot of the action has been taken away from this zone and is solely now been used as a diplomatic zone to help get them away from to get them away from everything that's occurring and all the hubbub of the other zones. This is a picture of the U.S. Climate Action Center where the U.S. Pavilion is. Most of the pavilions are located in the Bonn Zone, but because the U.S. doesn't have a national presence from our federal government, a donation from Michael Bloomberg helped get this up and running, so the U.S. would have a presence to show that we are still in and we are still fighting against climate change and still fighting to do the right thing. So this is inside of the main zone, the Bonn Zone. This is the Talanoa space, one of the big spaces. It is a united space between Germany and Fiji, and it's one of the big pavilions where they're hosting main events and other things happening in the Bonn Zone. Here are some more photos. This is of the Indian Pavilion, one of what I think is the coolest pavilions, which has a lot of high-tech gadgets and stuff. In the Indian Pavilion, they're talking a lot about how India themselves is taking on a leading role in solar and renewable energy and things that can help their own country, but also distribute electricity and other energy sources to countries that don't have the opportunities and countries that don't have the same landmass and population as themselves. This is the start of the Fiji Pavilion, and as this is the Bula Zone is the other zone, which in Fiji translates to welcome in Fijian. So this is just one of the signs. This is the entrance to the rest of the zone. Here's some more photos of what the Fiji Pavilion looks like and some other things. This is the outside of it, depicting Fijian landscapes and some people from Fiji. This is a traditional sailboat inside the Fijian Pavilion with traditional Fijian dress and some other things. The Fijian Pavilion is the biggest one here in the Bonn Zone. It has the most action and most things around it, and it kind of is the big center since Fiji is the host nation this year. These are photos from Thailand. The Thailand Pavilion is focused on a lot on their natural resources and how they can protect one of their beautiful landscapes and their own natural resources. This is just a snippet. Their pavilion is larger and includes another meeting room like all the pavilions. So this is one of the overview shots, which shows you the main areas of COP23 in the bond zone. This is one of the meeting zones. You can see the main United Nations pavilion where they're trying to share information, and just the scale of this temporary structure and how amazing it is that we're able to be in here. And this is one more photo of the meeting area. This is also in around the same region as the India Pavilion and the Tanaloa Pavilion. So this has just been like a quick overview of what the site looks like and what we're doing here.
One of the things, I don't know if you can hear in the background, we are physically in what's a computer center, which a half an hour ago was really good and quiet, and we thought this would be a nice location, but all of a sudden we hear jazz music downstairs, and it's, even though it's what, 7 o'clock in the evening here, it's still quite active, and sessions keep running quite late here. So it's a very demanding presence to try to take it all in. I thought it might be good to give a brief overview of the conference itself. I am very new to these this year, and so I've only gotten a brief overview from Climate Action Network, and so I'm probably going to give you some misperceptions of what is actually going on, but at least from my perspective, here's sort of what's happening. These conferences are called COP, which stands for Conference of Parties. It means representatives from all the nations that are participating. I guess that means all except the United States at this point. During the conference, Syria announced that it's going to participate too, so U.S. is the only one who has declared that they're not part of it and doesn't have an official delegation here. But as I understand it, people are quite aware that there was a great breakthrough in 2015 in Paris, in that there came a broad agreement on setting goals and targets, and people from various countries then made a commitment that they're going to proceed towards meeting those goals with sort of the broad goal of trying to keep climate heating, warming to less than 2%. So with that broad agreement, then this year is an attempt to really draft the rules that will at least push people to be transparent and report their progress, and also make some more movement towards some big issues that were left over from Paris, and actually that have increased as people have been talking about this, and I'll go into that a little bit more. And then these rules that are drafted this year then would be ratified next year in Poland, which is the next conference. And by the way, Kristen, feel free to pop in if I'm misstating something, you have a better understanding of this. But here's sort of the issues. Here's some of the issues that were sort of presented. One is, putting together the nitty-gritty details of how to implement the agreement. So that includes, how stakeholders are going to report their progress, how we're going to keep track of what the world is doing. And in a little bit, I'm going to show about some 5-year cycles that are going to be developing around this. Also, a number of the, especially less developed countries, have pushed forth a number of issues that need more dialogue. So the president of this conference, who is from Fiji, that's why Fiji is sponsoring this conference and is leading it, but they didn't have the capacity to have it in their home country. So that's why Germany agreed to host it on behalf of Fiji. So many of the less developed countries have pushed forward some issues. So chair of the conference in Fiji, has started to talk about this dialogue process that in their language, or Talanoa is a Fiji word that describes this process. And so they are going to be talking about several kind of issues. Some of the things that have been brought forward is that up until about 2001, the conference was afraid to talk about adaptation for climate change because they thought that would send the message that we're no longer trying to reduce carbon, that we're just going to give up. But now that is a reality as countries have seen negative impacts from climate change, and now the talk is more about adaptation, and even newer language is called loss and damage and displacement of people. And so there's discussion about how can we set up funds to support countries that don't have the internal capacity to deal with some of these impacts. So that's one of the things that they're trying to set up the ground rules for having those discussions next year. And then, so some of those goals are to be carried out by 2020. So they're trying to set up the finance mechanisms for making that happen. Let me probably pause at this point and see if there are questions about the process that is taking place at this conference. Any questions?
Doesn't look like there's any questions in the chat either.
Have you guys been following a specific thing really, or something that piqued your interest that you've been following particularly?
Yeah, so I've kind of been focusing that there's a lot of talk going on about what all the big countries are going to do. What's the EU going to do? What's maybe the US, if they were still here, what are they going to do? What's Russia going to do? What's China going to do? And I've kind of wanted to focus on maybe the people that we don't think about a lot. So South American countries, African countries, the countries in the South Pacific. And I've had some really interesting conversations with people from those countries. And I've been to a lot of talks where they have people talking about their own experiences with dealing with climate change and how they're trying to stop it in their own home country, which I thought was really interesting.
I've been kind of following. One of the big topics here is local and regional collaborations and cooperation around fighting the effects of climate change. In particular, I've been looking at some of the U.S. Organizations that have sponsored people being here. We have at least 4 governors from the U.S. here representing what they're going on, and 11 states have at least cabinet level representation here going on, and I'll show a couple of slides around that in a little bit. I've been also wanting to hear a little bit about education issues, and that's kind of coming up on Thursday. Thursday is a big day on that. Today was a day that was focused a little bit on gender issues. And I've been also just trying to get an overall view of the goal and the issues, and sort of soak up what's happening here. And we don't get a lot of details about the deliberations, the negotiations that are going on. We get some overview of it. This is going well, this is not going well, but no real direct responses about that.
John, this is Frank. Noah, on that last point you were just sharing about, the idea of subnational education collaboration, have you seen anything like that? Because over the years, that seems to be one of the big missing areas. Because like yourself, as a subnational education leader in one part of the world, would probably want to know about the other people, but so far it's been mostly nation to nation, and it misses the richness of what's going on below the nation. Have you seen anything that changes that, or is that still what you're hoping for on Thursday?
I haven't been hearing about it discussed in terms of education. I've been hearing about it in terms of coalitions who are addressing particular environmental factors that are affecting their area. We should see if I can slip forward here. Well, in particular, this is the mayor of Davenport, Iowa, and he talked about how cities along the Mississippi have formed a coalition. I think they call it the Mississippi Valley Corridor, and so they are addressing climate issues that are affecting them. In particular, he talked about the increased amount of flooding on the Mississippi, and how his city and region are trying to make the effort of not just building dikes to send the water further down and cause more problems further on, but looking at ways for the land to soak up the water and those kind of things. So, there's several of those kind of collaborations that reported on what they're doing.
I wanted to make note that there's a question in the chat asking about, I'll just read it from Frank Granshaw. To the presenters, in talking with the delegation from World Council of Churches last week, there's a concern about the official federal presence in being somewhat obstructionist. Any update on this? Also, any updates on the fossil fuel CEOs from the US who were presenting the role of clean fossil fuel technology?
Well, I'll jump ahead here. I had gotten in line to attend the session that was being put on by the administration representatives who were there to talk about. I think the title of their presentation was the role of clean energy or clean fossil fuels in assisting mitigation. And so, as you may have heard in the media, what happened is that there were several protesters inside the session. I never made it to the session because the line was too long, and they apparently sang some version of
Proud to be an American.
what's that?
Proud to be an American.
Proud to be an American, and with new lyrics. I haven't heard the lyrics, but they were escorted out, and then they formed a sit-in outside the meeting room, and made a lot of press. I think this is indication of the feeling of especially a lot of American observers there at the conference. I know that Governor Brown of California had given a presentation earlier before we got here, and the people in the conference challenged him a lot about what his state is doing about fracking, even though he is here and one of the lead in terms of local activity. But those are the only two really protest things that I've heard at the conference, and I think they're not real indicative of the kind of atmosphere that most of the conference is about. I'm not sure about the CEO's perspective. I know there was some talk about how polluters have a presence here, and people wondering about why that was possible. Have they sort of bought their way into the conference, or what the role is? But I don't have a real good feel for how that actually plays out. So a little bit, let's see, what else did we sort of skip over here? This is one of the things that they're doing is planning towards 5-year cycles in which nations declare their contribution and they make a 5-year pledge as to what they're going to do. And then at the end of the 5 years, they are to report out and then make a new goal for the next 5 years that is increasingly strengthening our approach towards climate change. That's sort of the plan that's came out of the Paris, in which they're trying to set the ground rules for that. And each 5 years, there's supposed to be a global stocktake on assessing the indicators within the global climate as a whole. So let's see, there's other sorts of stuff. This is this.
Can you go back to that slide for a second?
Yep.
If I remember right, the N is national.
National, yeah.
Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, national.
Determined contribution.
Determined contribution. Yep, that's right.
So, you know, given the presence of subnational, is there any conversation of some way that organizations and states and cities could be not an NDC, but I don't know, a CDC or a SDC or something that represents you know, that ambitious contribution that is not national but something smaller? Has that kind of shown up yet?
I think that on Saturday or Friday, there was, I think it was Saturday, there was a meeting of local groups and regional groups. I think kind of, and I can't remember if it was purely a U.S. one or it was international, but at the end of that, there was a definition of what the local groups could contribute towards fighting climate change. And I haven't seen the product of that, but that was sort of the impression that people are saying, especially with the U.S. situation, based on what cities and regions can do, states can do, there's a certain determination that, you know, we could probably meet some of the commitments that the U.S. earlier had made in the Paris Agreement, just based on local contributions.
Thank you.
At least that's the sense. I don't have all the details to that, and I think you can read about it in some of the publications that are being put out.
Do I remember right? Go ahead, John. Or Adri.
Well, it's just sort of an indication of kind of the type of meetings that are going on. And then there are a lot of what they call side events. The actual deliberations are held in, as Adri saw, the Bula zone, and then in the Bonn zone, there's a constant stream of events, discussions to a certain extent, unofficial, that are taking place, and people can pursue their understanding of the issues and how people are taking that. So I think that's basically, this is the Governor Brown of Oregon, who is presenting here at this U.S. Climate Action Center. This is this area that Adri's talked about as being sponsored with a big contribution from Bloomberg that is taking on here. And this is Stephanie, I think her last name is Sharatowski. She is the Minnesota Governor Dayton's representative here at the conference and talking about some of the efforts that Minnesota is putting into this. And I think that was all the slides we had. So certainly can continue on with other questions that you have.
I guess I have a question for student. Sorry, I'm forgetting your name.
Adri.
Thank you, Adri. Have you been able to meet other kind of young people who are working in this space while you were over there from maybe different places? And what has that been like?
I haven't really met any young people in that regard. There is a summit that's happening, not a summit, like a group meeting every day at 11 o'clock for young delegates, but I haven't been to it yet. It's just like a small group thing. I've spent some time talking with other people. There have been some young representatives from Suriname that I spent time talking with at their little booth upstairs. And there's other people that are my age, not my age, but younger delegates that are here at COP that I've spent time talking to, but no real like formal things, just some little chit chats here and there, I'll say.
Looking for other questions that people might have. I'm interested in like what other state teams, there seem to be other groups that are clearly defined. Like I'm sure California maybe feels that way, but like are there other states that have like a heavy representation there?
Did you say other state groups?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I mean, we saw, several people from California, Oregon. I think there's at least maybe 15 or so people from Minnesota that are around here. There's representatives from students from a couple of the colleges and one of the high schools, and maybe even more. We do see a lot of students here who are observing this event. I've run across certainly a lot of people from Germany, but from several other countries in Europe, especially, that are sort of studying what's going on. One of the other big emphasis here is indigenous people. A lot of representatives from island nations because of the sponsorship of Fiji and other indigenous peoples, and there have been meetings where those people can go to and express some of their concerns.
Anyone else have any kinds of questions for Adri and John?
I've got another one that's from the chat. It says, Adri, I'm curious to hear more about what you've learned or experienced in your high school about climate change and how that contributed to your desire to come to COP.
Just to clarify, Adri's in middle school.
Middle school.
So my decision to come to COP was kind of like a mashing of a lot of different things. So in school, we've done a lot of things that have to do with climate change and other stuff dedicated that are a lot of issues that they're talking about in COP. And a lot of kids I think are interested, but I was able to go. My mom, she is a professor at McAllister, and they've sent a delegation. I don't know how long, but she went to Paris, and she was gonna plan to go to Marrakesh, but they didn't get any students. But for this, I was able to go because I just wanted to see a lot about it, and I was pushing my mom to see if she could take me. they had open spots left in the climate gen passes for the bond zone, so I was able to get one of those. And I am a fourth-year German student, so that really helped coming to Germany. So it was a lot of different things that drew me to come to COP, and a lot of different ways that I was able to come. So I think it all worked out really well.
Well, I'm wondering already if you both have ideas or unanticipated things you think you'll bring back from this experience. Like, we maybe were planning on certain things, but is there anything else that's popped to mind?
One thing that I kind of want to try to figure out is my school at SBA, it's a very well-funded school. And I think that if we're lucky, we can try. I want to try to push to see if they can start sending a delegation of high school students to go to the COP conferences, because I think it's a really good experience for students. And I'm sure there are plenty of teachers that would be willing to take them. And I just kind of want to push to see that, because I think that'd be like really good for a school and really good for students as an experience.
One of the things that I'm hoping to do and is sort of follow a little bit about what's happening with less developed countries that are facing the impact of climate change. As Kristen mentioned in the introduction, I spent some time in Liberia, and this last time when I was there, I happened to run into at the airport the representative of Liberia who is involved with climate talk. So we're planning to get together and find out how they're responding to it. I've heard, sort of talks about the impact of sea level rise, especially since many of the countries where they do have sea level, a big share of their economy depends upon fishing or other kinds of aspects of that. I also heard discussion about agriculture, and one of the big issues with agriculture is that about, I think, some large percentage, like 70% of the world's poor live in rural areas, and as they have impacts on crops and other agriculture things, they end up tending to migrate to the cities, which even compounds the problem, because now there's more food, more people to feed, less agriculture going on, even though some people have described this as the city gaining a talent pool of people who are industrious and can try out some other aspects. So there's always, with many of these issues, a lot of trade-offs, both positive and negative, that come with adaptations and other consequences of climate change.
John, this is Frank at NOAA. One of the things that both Kristen and I, and also Johanna, were all at COP21, there was a sense of hope that was, very strong at COP21. What's the sense of COP23? Feel confident that we are on our way to addressing this effectively, and that everyone is making, that we feel like we've got it before us, or do we feel like we're still struggling to make progress and it's less hopeful than it was in 2015?
It's hard for me to judge that, as I overhear some people who were in previous COPs and this one, they sort of had the sense that more of the stuff is undercover and that they're really not seeing what's going on in terms of the actual deliberation and progress forward, and that there are people raising more issues than there are solutions that are coming around. But that's only a hearsay kind of a sense, and I'm hoping that I can hear more sense of hope. I think one of the things that is also interesting is that as I hear people talk about some of these collaborations and the effects that they're making, is that there's a feeling that some of the alternative fuels and increased efficiencies have some real promise. There's talk about the promise of better battery storage, talk about how many places are finding new kinds of alternative energy, with be it geothermal or other kinds of things that they hadn't anticipated that they could make as big progress on. So some people are very optimistic, and some are feel that things are kind of weighed down.
And is it Adri? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Hey, Adri, what do you think as an 8th grader? I mean, you have some perspective here. What's your thought on that?
Well, as I said, as John, I have not been to the COP15, so I can't really do some comparison. But here, I think there is a lot different. I feel like they've tried to move negotiations into a more private space, and that's really affected, I think, some people, because they feel as if it's the government trying to keep their opinions away and trying to have less persuasion. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but I'm saying that's a perspective that people have. But I also think that because of the big changes that have happened in the U.S., some people are less confident that, well, because of this, we're going to go backwards. But I think the idea is right now, because of what the U.S. at a federal level is doing and how the states are trying to basically fend for themselves, that they can leave the U.S. federal government behind and just leave them there, and they can move on with state power and other people that are still doing their part in the U.S.
Good answer.
Yeah.
This is
Jen, do you want? I'm sorry, Kristen. Do you want to handle the question that came in from Jen Kretzer, or you want me to?
Yeah, sure. So, as follow up to this, actually, I should post. We have a post panel, which will be live streamed on the 27th of November. And so I can share that information as well about that. So we'll have the opportunity to hear back from all the delegates as well as others that are there in Minnesota. So our John mentioned the policy advisor from the governor's office is at COP, and she will be on that panel. So that's the link to that, and that is on Monday. We also have, before all the folks from Minnesota, so not just the ones from Climate Generation, before everyone left Minnesota, we had a meeting with the lieutenant governor, and there will be she expressed a desire to meet with everyone following COP as well, to have report outs on that. So those are two big follow-ups from the this year's folks that are from Minnesota.
Really, really exciting.
Great, Frank, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
I've got a question for you. Wife and I just got back from yesterday from the first week at COP23. And one of the things that was, it struck me was that we were out in the bond zone, and we didn't hear much of what was going on in the Beulah zone. But you seem to be pretty well informed. How are you accomplishing that?
Most of my real factual information comes from some press briefings by Climate Action Network. I've been trying to follow what they're reporting out and attending some of the side events where they're talking a little bit about what they're hearing from the deliberations.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know, also Frank, John also has a Beulah zone accreditation. So I don't know if you only had a bond zone bad also.
I was only bond zone.
Okay, so John is Bula and bond.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah. And same with Adri too.
No, I'm just Bonzo.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they won't let people under 16, I believe, into the Bula zone.
Which
It's,
is
I think it's 8. Yeah, I think it's 18. But
I think they just lowered the age from 18 to 16 due to quite a lot of lobbying on the case of the youth. Saying that, you know, it's really unfair for people who are going to be most affected to not actually be able to engage in this process. So it's a step forward, but I definitely believe we should have more young people who are in there and in the negotiations.
Actually, Adri has said that as he's talked to people, people have invited him to be on panels and, at discussions, but I don't know, you haven't taken him up.
yeah, so they have like youth events every day in the bond zone, which aren't exactly panels. They're just like groups of youth sharing experiences. We have them every day. I think people are allowed to come that are youth and just like look around and see what they're talking about. I haven't done one yet. I might do one tomorrow if I don't plan anything. But I think that it's not really a panel, it's just people sharing their thoughts and collaborating. But it's good to get many youth delegates together, so yeah.
Adri, I just wanted to say I would encourage you, if it is in a zone that you can go to, it is a really great space to go. I was involved there in the past. So there are working groups that if you wanted to get involved in and look at some of the negotiations more closely, that you can quite easily kind of engage and jump in.
Did I remember correctly that Sarah Niemeyer, if I said it right, Niemeyer, had a class of students? I don't know if they have any questions.
Regrettably, they jumped off the line.
Yeah, she only could be on the first 20 minutes. She's been able to make, yeah.
Okay, so she's not actually there, even though her name is there.
Maybe she's there, but her class is gone.
I see.
Sarah, feel free to say hey, but yeah. Is there any other questions from the crew?
Just wanted to say I'm really excited that you guys have been there and have provided some fun insight from like within the bond and Bula zones.
Great. Well, we enjoyed doing this. We certainly enjoy representing climate generation and other constituencies. So it's been a great experience.
This is Frank Grancha again. It sounds like it's a lot more hopping there this week than it was last, and I'm glad to hear what's going on.
Yeah, there is a lot going on, and it certainly hasn't calmed down as of 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, that's great.
One last question. This is Frank again. The what is it? The U.S. Climate Alliance Center. What's the name of that, by the way?
So that area is the U.S. Climate Alliance Center, but it's also the pavilion that the U.S. is using, like all the other nations have inside the bond zone. But since it's not by the federal government, they don't have one in the bond zone, so they just made their own, so people would still be able to come and see these.
Right. So have you spent any time there?
I'm heading there right now to there is a higher education thing, and we're gonna look around. I don't know.
But I don't know if we got control of our slides anymore. there's a bunch of domes, and during much of the time, the last 2 days, the U.S. Climate Center, or Climate Alliance, has been working with just one of the domes, and there's been a conference on renewable energy that's been occupying the other domes. As I understand it, starting tomorrow, that U.S. activities will be in all the domes, and there are several events going on. The one that there were a couple of events. One that I went in today was just in the one dome, and it was just a presentation or a panel discussion. But apparently there'll be many more activities in all these other domes, especially starting tomorrow. As I mentioned, at 4 o'clock, there's actually a presentation and panel about Minnesota's efforts towards climate change. So I'm really excited to hear several of the representatives from Minnesota talk about our efforts.
Yeah, I put a web link into the entire U.S. Climate Action Pavilion, but then there's a live stream of that panel, I know, tomorrow, which I included there as well.
I'd be very interested to see, John, especially given some of the other wider conversations, I see there's a series of higher education, college coming up. It'd be interesting just to see what role is education playing as it's being represented to the world. It's very hard to build collaborations in this international climate space. It's been a hard thing to do over the years. And if there's any opportunity for collaboration, connecting people, we've got a lot of practice in the United States that no one knows about. And this is an opportunity to do that. I'd just be interested to see, how that goes. So anyway, just, it's an open question.
Yeah, I think, I was sort of surprised at walking around the exhibits that there were not more that talked about education. Most of the stuff that I have seen has been more like public education or education for particular groups, especially women. But I have not seen much in the way of things related to schools and informal ed for K-12 age type of people.
Well, your perspectives when you come home would be very valuable, both of you actually. Because the other one, Adri, is how students are engaged in this, and youth. Your perspectives, because when I was in COP21, the youth voice and presence was very strong, and the people who were representing were amazing. So, there's some really great people there. So just more opportunities to have your experience shared would be wonderful.
Great. Well, look for those opportunities.
Thank you. Are we good? We're close to the end of time. Any last questions?
Yeah, this is Frank Grancha again. A quick question for So the climate, the domes are sort of tucked away there in a somewhat obscure place. And I know last week it didn't come online until probably about Wednesday, and then it gradually sort of increased in number of people. Is there a little bit more awareness in people over at the Bond Zone that the Climate Action Center is there?
I think people are aware that it's there, but there haven't been, as I understand it, that many sessions there, because that alternative energy conference or session has been occupying most of it. And actually, when you walk in there, it's hard to figure out what's the U.S. stuff and what's the rest of this conference. So I hope as they take over more of the space, that it will become more apparent what's over there and the type of opportunities there are.
Yeah, I'm glad that it's there, but like I say, it is tucked away in kind of an obscure space. You really have to look for it.
Yeah, and I know that when I first tried to figure out what was there, it took me a while to understand that, oh yeah, here's the place to go to get to the stuff that was available. Maybe also when they learn that some of the session like this afternoon had free food, that might help.
A lot of free food.
So,
Well, I think that's probably good on time. Thank you so very much, Kristen, for sharing your amazing delegation with us today.
Thanks, you guys. Get some sleep.
all right, that's a challenge.